Hear me now, conscience I represent, and this is Starlight. So now I say, mad.
Mega Man.
Thanks so much for staying with us, and a special welcome to you on Hot 102 and on the internet at cvmtv.com. Now, the nation is still absorbing news that entertainer Adidja Vybz Kartel Palmer has been found guilty of murder. Kartel and 3 of the men who were jointly charged with him were found guilty late this afternoon.
Our reporter Dwayne Anderson has been covering the case, which has attracted even international attention. Dwayne joins us in studio. Dwayne?
Good evening, Darren. Good evening, Caroline. Good evening to our viewers. Well, I'll take you through the sequence of events in court this afternoon as the verdict was to be read by the jurors. Around 5:30, that's nearly 2 hours after the judge finally completed his, 6-day summation, jurors returned from their deliberations with news that they had completed. They had reached a verdict. The courtroom was jammed. I mean, there was not enough space inside to turn. The standing room was taken, sitting room was taken. Even DPP Paul Lewin was there beside her team from the prosecution, from the office of the DPP. They're waiting on the verdict. Whispers could be heard from the defense team at that time. They were saying something to the nature of, we bust a case. Yeah, but this was not to be, because when the Madam Foreman stood and read the verdict, she said that they had reached a verdict, they had arrived at a verdict, was her exact word, that it was a 10-1 verdict. But the problem here was that they had not taken enough time as allowed under the Jury Act to reach a unanimous guilty verdict. So they had to be sent back to the jury room for deliberations. However, they returned 20 minutes later and said they had a guilty verdict for Vybz Kartel, whose real name is Adidja Palmer. When the Madam Foreman was asked by a clerk of the court, she said that they had reached a verdict, and as soon as she said that we had reached a verdict and it's guilty, there were shrieks of yes from the prosecution's bench.
And in the moments after the verdict was read, what was the mood like outside the courtroom?
Well, when we got outside, the family members were outside in the courtyard sitting. They were looking very, very, very despondent. When we went out on the streets, supporters who had gathered there, they started walking away. Others were shouting that they could not believe it. Others were even saying that we still want the world boss to free. And then we heard a couple of explosions, about 3 or 4 explosions, where we've not been able to ascertain if there were in fact gunshots. But we saw the police officers high-powered weapons running in the direction of the explosions. Up to newstime, we haven't been able to ascertain if those were in fact gunshots, but explosions were heard.
In the moments after the verdict was read, there were reports that the police were standing by to arrest one of the jurors. What were you able to hear?
We were not able to get a lot, but what we did hear from DPP Paul Lewin was that one of the jurors was to be charged for perverting the course of justice. And it is coincidental that a 10-1 verdict was reached for 4 of the men, and 1 person was to be charged for perverting the course of justice. We're not saying that one person is the person who was indeed charged for perverting the course of justice, but it's something to look at.
Dwayne, just go back a little, back inside the court. You mentioned the time frame. Can you expound on that for our viewers? All right.
As allowed or prescribed under the Jury Act, if the jury is supposed to reach a guilty verdict, they have to take about more than 2 hours. They have to take more than 2 hours. When they returned around 5:30, that was something like an hour 47 minutes before. So they had to be sent back. And when they went out, they really never changed anything. They returned with the same 10-1 verdict. But what they did was they had used up the allotted time or the prescribed time to come to arrive at a verdict, a guilty verdict of Vybz Kartel.
You mentioned the atmosphere outside, especially with the relatives. Was it the same thing earlier in the day that you observed?
Absolutely not. They were upbeat. Defense lawyers were confident. Persons were there. They were confident because the defense team felt they had done enough to create a reasonable doubt that these men were in fact not guilty of the crime brought against them. But that was quickly dismissed when these verdicts were read down.
Any indication as to what next for him?
Well, what next is that they'll return on March 27 for sentencing. There were whispers around, I must say, in the early stages of this trial that some legal minds who were observing the case felt that the defense would have lost this case. We can't say no that they have indeed lost it, but there were early whispers that they would lose it, but they could go to the Court of Appeal and get something positive of Vybz Kartel. So that might be something which they explore, but in terms of what is next for these 4 men charged for murder, 27th of March, they'll face sentencing.
What of the family of the victim?
Well, the grandmother was there, male members were there, sisters were there. They were not as open in terms of conversation as they were previously. So we don't know their mental state right now, but we can imagine that based on the person they said he was very kind. I'd imagine they'll be feeling very, very down because he was, in fact, what you probably can say the most popular member of the family, being that he's such a famous dancehall artist.
Speaking of Lizard.
We did not see his sister. I did not see his sister today. She was in court for most of the time during this trial. She wasn't there today. Don't know. Well, I cannot say she wasn't there, but I never saw her today at all. So I'm not sure where her mental state is right now, but I'm certain she will be feeling some level of justice has been served in terms of her brother's death.
Thank you, Dwayne.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. Now, while it was not in the media spotlight today, the community of Waterford and St. Catherine will capture much interest as it is the base of the Gaza Empire. Our reporter, Keneal Gale, has been in Waterford since this afternoon and joins us by telephone. Keneal?
Darian, good evening and good evening to our viewers. I'm actually at Vybz Kartel's mother's house. No, she agreed to give us an on-camera interview, but as we were about to start interviewing her, one of her daughters came in and decided that shouldn't be the route the family take at this time, and said that they will ask their lawyers to call a press conference in the coming days to speak to the media so they can have an official press conference for the family speaking to the media. But basically the family saying that they believe the trial was unfair and Vybz Kartel was wrongfully convicted. Darren?
Thank you very much, Keneal Gale, reporting from the base of the Gaza Empire in St. Catherine. Caroline?
Now, in the hours before the guilty verdict was handed down, there were sporadic chants among supporters of the entertainer, Vybz Kartel. They were basically saying he should be freed. A large crowd had converged on the outer band of buffer zone set up by the police around the Supreme Court building. International star Busta Rhymes and Spliff Star drew ecstatic responses from a thick crowd of Kartel supporters as well. The police, bolstered by their numbers, quickly repelled the crowd of persons who continued to chant for Kartel to be freed.
As we said, there is relief for one of the 5 murder accused this evening. He is Shane Williams, who was implicated in one of the voice notes which were played during the trial. His attorney-at-law spoke with the media this evening.
He denied that from day one. That, listen, that's not my voice, and I don't know this person. I've never spoken to this person, and he denies it. He has no knowledge of it.
What's next for your client?
Well, he's supposed to be released, and based on what he has said to me, he needs some psychological treatment for the time he has been in custody, so we'll be looking forward towards that.
Any plans to sue the government?
Well, I couldn't say anything about that right now. I'm working on instructions, so if my client said, well, go ahead and proceed, then I'll do that. But if not, I'll
do you think they detained their client for too long?
I would not say for too long. It's a system and in terms of the process, and that is now completed. So it's over.
And the Director of Public Prosecution, Paula Llewellyn, has commended her team, which led the state's case. Ms. Llewellyn spoke with Simon Croskill on Live at 7 a short while ago.
I've been a prosecutor for 30 years, so I have prosecuted many cases, many cause celeb, But in respect of this one, the prosecution had a lot of challenges. A lot of challenges. And all I would do is commend the prosecutors from my team at the Office of the DPP, Mr. Jeremy Taylor, Senior Deputy Director of Public Prosecution, Mr. Leighton Morris. They worked many late nights. There was a lot of research. The case had a lot of complex issues. And at every turn, we were swimming upstream like the salmon. My late departed colleague, Deputy Director, Ms. Joan Barnett, who had been first assigned with the matter, she passed away late last year. She started the research and the preparation and the consultation and collaboration with the police. I have to commend the professional police officers who dealt with this matter. It was not an easy matter to investigate because they too were swimming upstream. You are dealing with figures who are very popular in the dancehall culture. So to get the cooperation of civilians was not easy. I have to commend the main civilian witness, I think his name is Mr. Chow, because he had to be very courageous. The prosecution, police and prosecutors had to persuade him. We had to find him because at one stage we didn't even know where he was, and we had to find him and convince him to give the evidence. And he withstood at least 6 days of cross-examination. Well, presently in 2014, where the informer fidel culture is at its peak with what has been happening, the problems with gangs and the problems with a lot of persons who believe that since it's not my business, I am not going to go anywhere near a courthouse to give evidence. I think it's a watershed in that because of the popularity of the figures involved, it is showing the country that justice is alive and well, and that if it is that you are brave enough and courageous enough, that if you step forward, we make arrangements to protect you.
All right.
And we have to make that it can work.
Madam DPP.
Yes, sir.
There is a story, I believe it's been confirmed, that a juror tried to bribe the foreman of the panel to vote one way. What's going to be happening in that instance?
Well, the police have reasonable cause to suspect that an offense was committed by this individual. So pursuant to that, they will complete their investigations and make the arrangements after having arrested him, which I believe they did earlier. After the matter was completed, they will certainly, with the file, take him to the resident magistrate's court in Halfway Tree sometime between tomorrow and early next week to initiate prosecution for attempting to pervert the course of justice.
Any idea how quickly that prosecution will take place? And is it an indictment still on, whilst you praised, I believe, Mr. Chow for coming forward and holding firm, is it still an indictment on our legal process?
Well, what is an indictment? You mean the fact that this offense took place?
Yes.
Well, it has happened before in the past, What is important is that if we have credible evidence that the system can react quickly to make sure that it is detected and that it is dealt with decisively. And this is exactly what the police authorities and the prosecutorial authorities are doing.
Paula Llewellyn, the Director of Public Prosecutions, there talking to Samuel Crosshill on Live at 7 this afternoon. And in the hours before the guilty verdict was handed down, there were sporadic chants among supporters of the entertainer for Vybz Kartel to be freed. A large crowd had converged on the outer bands of a buffer zone set up by the police around the Supreme Court building. International stars Busta Rhymes and Spliff Star drew ecstatic responses from a thick crowd of Kartel supporters. The police, bolstered by their numbers, quickly repelled the crowd of persons who continued to chant for Kartel to be freed.
On to other news now. This.
Hey, when the starlight dance, I keep the fire blazing, acting for something. Happy time, happy time. When a happy time, you know where we find me. It's an holiday, and a starlight dance, I'll miss. Boom, rough up, bro.